right, so I'll keep going. So let me give just a really quick introduction as to why Indian beekeeping is so important. So 50% of the workforce in India is involved in agriculture. So in the US, I think that's like 1 to 2%-ish. India, it's 50%. Now there's a problem with this. And the problem is that every generation, the farmland that's available gets broken up amongst the sons. And so what used to be a reasonable thing that you could have 50% of your people doing farmland, agriculture, now you have all these tiny plots. So you can see, just from the landscape, you have farmers that are trying to make a living on 1 acre. And this is not very sustainable. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of options. If you get an education, you can go and work in the city, but otherwise, you're really stuck kind of where you are. Beekeeping is so interesting because it means that for these people that really don't have jobs and they really don't have land to work with, they can make a really sustainable income for themselves, and they don't need any farmland. And so they will place their hives under trees, on the side of roads, a wide variety of places, but it gives them a real occupation and allows them to sort of escape that cycle. So this is something that, for me, was really exciting and motivated a lot of what I did. So let me go and now switch over into a picture, or actually video, of some Indian beekeeping. So this was an Indian beekeeper. And so right off the bat, you might notice some interesting things. He's got, I think it's 9 or 10 frames. It's a Langstroth box. Similar dimensions to what we have. It's actually the same bee. It's a European bee. Interestingly, they're wearing sandals while doing beekeeping. They're very brave. It's very hot. It's always very, very warm. You can see they were not using foundation in this case. You can buy foundation, but a lot of people, they'll just have empty frames that the bees put out. You notice there's a cloth that actually, it's jute cloth that they spread over on top of the hive, and that gets everything to seal a little bit nicer, provides a little bit more ventilation. They're actually very innovative in that you can use this cloth to pour water on top of it, and the water then can evaporate. So it's a way of actually getting the hive to stay cool. So it's pretty cool. One other thing that's interesting that I'll talk more is that the entrance size in the front is fixed. I did a lot of work at looking at hive entrances, and so this is a fixed size entrance. We usually have entrance reducers, we make them larger or smaller. They'd have a fixed size, and if they wanted it smaller, they could add mud, sort of plug it up and make it even tinier. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. If you guys do have any questions as we go, feel free to stop me, and I'll try to answer them. So moving forward, this is another part of India. This was in the southern part of India. They use the Indian bee that's more native. And it's a smaller bee, doesn't produce as much, but when they tried to introduce the European bee into the southern parts of India, had a lot of disease. And so this is a smaller bee, you won't get as much honey, but they love to color their boxes all kinds of pretty colors. And you can see some sort of Indian things, like for example, the roof of one of the beehives is actually a tile. That they just said, I need a roof, and they made do. So it's very, very, very resourceful in general. If I look at sort of a comparison of all hive types, I just mentioned sort of the normal Langstroth hive of the Indian beekeepers. It's really a Langstroth hives, but it's for the Apis cerana, which is the Indian bee. You'll also find in different regions, so in the Himalayas, I saw folks that had wall hives, which is like the inside of their walls. They cut them away, and they put up boards and seal them with mud, and the bees actually will have a hive inside their house, which is pretty cool. And also mud hives, there's also log hives. One of the things though that I was very curious on, that I got some insight into over the course of my time, was why the boxes aren't stacked so high. So when I was working with my advisor, we'd have really, really tall hives with lots of boxes. Our goal was to get them as big as we could, harvest as much honey as we could from each one. In India, you find a lot of small hives, and I wanted to understand why that is, and we'll talk more about that. If you have looked into Indian beekeeping though, you may have heard of like honey hunters, the people that climb up trees with knives and like carve out honey. That deals with, in particular, the Apis dorsata. So they have, this kind of bee has one comb, and then they just layer themselves on the outside to keep it warm and defend it. They cluster together, they're very ferocious. If they feel attacked, they will come and they will like really hurt you. So I didn't work with these bees, but I did get to see them. One of my beekeeper friends said, hey, we gotta go. We hopped on his motorcycle, which was exciting. And we went out there and we got to see I think this had the record for like the most Apis dorsata bees in at least part of India, and it was pretty impressive. Okay, there is a smaller bee. This is the Apis florea. Again, I wasn't working with a lot. This isn't commercialized, but you'll see them, and they like to hang a little bit smaller. This was just in a bush. The beekeeper was like, oh look, we have more bees over here. And I was like, oh my goodness, in this bush you can actually see them just hanging on a limb, which is pretty cool. All right, so I'm gonna transition now into the actual research that I did. I gave you a little bit of context, a little bit of images and video to see what beekeeping is. My research, again, was broken into lots of little pieces, and it started with wasps, and then it quickly evolved into a lot of different areas. So let me give you a sort of diagram of my research and kind of the flow. So it started with saying, okay, I'm gonna start by looking at wasps, and that got sort of broken up into how to identify wasps, and then how do I kill wasps or stop them, because I did not want wasps to attack with beehives. And that kind of evolved in some crazy technological like audio analysis, video analysis, and then the very, obvious realization, well, this would be great for the professor's wife who would pay a lot of money to zap wasps, but that wasn't an appropriate technology for India. And so I started to look on sort of the stopping wasp side into shocking wasps, which is pretty cool. I have some video of that. Into entrance design, which became a main theme of my research. And this kind of evolved into an academic focus of when I was trying to do experiments, I wanted to weigh hives. I realized that we're not good at hive scales, so I got to do a lot of calculus, analyzing hive scales, which is interesting. I took a fluid dynamics course, so I got to look at fluid dynamics of beehives, and there's some cool takeaways from there. And then just from visiting India, there was all these apparent, like, you know what, we should do this really simple test, and we should learn something very specific that's very actionable. And so 3 things that came out of it were looking at Indian hive roofs, looking at the standard and design and manufacture of Indian beehives, and then lastly, I spent some time looking at some ways of that beekeepers in India could keep better care of their hives with managing how they were doing over time. So it evolved a lot. So I'm going to break it down into sort of the 5 key areas that I mentioned before.